Now, the great pleasure to welcome our next guest, Gilbert and George. Welcome, Gilbert and George. Actually, preparing the interview for this morning, I've been rereading this very astonishing publication which came out about your work actually in France, which has all to do with the city. And it sort of puts E1 in 20 words, from Art for All to Brick Lane to City to Cockney to Dirty to Docks to Fictions to Fournier Street to Gothic to Green to Immigration to Jack the Ripper to Maps to Marginality to Neighborhood to Religion to Street Writing to Strikes to Textile to Violence. So I wanted to start with asking you about the city and the kind of role the city plays within your work.
I would say that we really are the city boys. We only like big cities. If we are half an hour outside the city, we are lost. We don't like it. And especially because George always believes that once you are in the greens, you become a different kind of person. You don't understand people anymore.
We always believe that an excessive love of nature leads to totalitarianism. And we can prove the dangers of the nature, because we once went to visit our late friend Daniel Farson in a very beautiful village in North Devon, and we stayed in a neighbouring hotel, and we got up early in the morning because we wanted to see the estuary with the beautiful river birds, and the whole village was very quiet and the sun was just coming out, and we came up the little village high street, and there was the lovely parish church with the bees buzzing around the graves, and outside of the churchyard was a very beautiful young couple with a small baby in a pram, and they looked so sweet, and it looked such a perfect, wonderful part of the world, completely ideal and exquisite. And we turned and said, "Good morning," and the young man turned and said, "Fuck off, you weird-looking twats."
Nevertheless, I can remember as one of your most beautiful works, a kind of hand-drawn series of yourselves in the middle of nature with extremely lyrical proclamations. Was it an earlier life?
That was before we discovered alcohol. Can you imagine?
Probably as baby artists we had a problem to face the city and other people, and we used nature, which wasn't really nature, it was always London parks, or Kew Gardens was the farthest. And then I think in the mid-70s we suddenly realized that the chaos of that nature was much better the reality that was around us, the streets and the people.
That's why, to understand London, we always take a bus to the end of the line and walk back towards Fournier Street. And that is extraordinary.
The 133 is one of our favorites. That goes all the way to... We get off at Streatham, but it goes even further. And we have lovely coffees in Arab cafes there, where they're extremely friendly.
And sometimes we used to make a list of streets from, let's say, from Liverpool to Crystal Palace. It was an extraordinary walk.
Just on one postcard. So it tells you where to turn left. Like those machines they now have in cabs. It's exactly like that, just on one postcard. So we walked from Fournier Street to Annerley to have lunch with someone. It took the whole morning. We just had this one small postcard.
And the city is just extraordinary. Especially, like, say, in the east of London, or like walking up Kingsland Road or Commercial Street, the urban streets of London are just incredible.
And they're still incredible, because we have heard a lot of nostalgic descriptions of what is disappearing from London.
We don't care about that. Last night, when we took a bus back, it's 10 o'clock, in front of us it was like Falaraki. Have you heard of Falaraki? Unbelievable. Misbehavior in a big way. Just thousands of people outside in the open. At 10 o'clock, extraordinary.
There are dozens and dozens of people literally sitting in the gutter in our street. They're all very middle-class people. They're not cockneys, they're not rough, they're not aggressive. They're all people who are training to be doctors or architects. and the whole pub, one of the pubs at the end of the street is exclusively for drugs, and it's totally accepted. No police interfere, people just go there for drugs. It's extraordinarily modern in that way. We used to describe London in the 70s as the city that was the most stressful, and we rather liked that because we were very stressed. And we said, you just have to look at the thousands of people emerging from Liverpool Street Underground in the morning. They're all frowning and worrying, and they're all desperate that they have to go and do this terrible office job. This is no longer true. They're all coming out of the underground now with their earphones full of music. You can't tell the difference between a young builder and a city boy going off to the gym before they go to work. It's all much more democratic and much more friendly and very, very safe.
But we are against
charming.
rucksacks. We are quite against rucksacks because we feel because they are like in cafes where you go in and they have this enormous rucksack. When they turn, they smack you into your face.
I totally agree. Rucksacks kind of make mankind twice as voluminous. And there's simply no space for them.
It's very dangerous on the escalators as well.
Yeah.
You get on just behind someone, and 1/3 of the way up the escalator, they push you over backwards.
So there's also a series of protests actually throughout this long night. We started with a protest against forgetting from Eric Hobsbawm. Now we have the protest against the rucksack.
Yeah.
Now in terms of the mapping of the city, because there has been a lot of discussion about the sort of impossibility of making a sort of a synthetic image of something such complex as London is. And I think one of the things which I wanted to ask you was in terms of your way of sort of mapping the city has actually very much to do with Fournier Street and the streets around, and somehow you very early sort of found the whole world within this sort of street. So I wanted to ask you maybe to talk a little bit about this.
Well, we always said that Liverpool Street is Jerusalem for us, no? It is, but the best way to see the city of London is to go to Crouch End and look down. And it's just a golden city. It's just extraordinary. Don't you think?
You can see all the way through to Docklands and everything. You see every major building stands out from there. It's extraordinary.
Like Alice in Wonderland. It's just fantastic. And even because we do believe that at the moment, East End of London is the center, what you call, in some way of the world. If you understand East End of London, you understand the world. I really believe that. Because everybody is there. Everybody. There are thousands of different languages being spoken and 1,000 different people. George is the only English person there.
I have a question. Is it easier, because it's a really very striking difference. The two of you are optimistic in a very robust way. Is the fact that you're a single combined identity making it easier to be optimistic, or to resist anxiety, or to...
I'm sure that's true, yes.
Huh?
To be too removed self-doubt. Normally the artist has to look at the empty canvas and think, what am I going to do now? What should I do? Should I put another cow in the field? Should I lower the sunset? And no answer comes back. But when there are two, there's always someone to say, oh, put another cow in, go on.
And
so we used to describe London to people who never believed it in the 70s or the 80s. We used to say, if a spaceship was coming down on the planet Earth and they telephoned and said, we've just got 5 minutes to film planet Earth, to take a report back to our people, where should we do it? We'd say, Brick Lane, Liverpool Street. That's typical planet Earth. Because if you go to most places in the world, they won't be typical planet Earth. They'll be typical 1940s, typical 1930s. But London is much more actual. Even the look, the gaze of people, eye contact is totally different from other parts of the world, we believe.
Is the fact that you're working together and have been working together for such a long time also the secret of the unbelievable consistency of your work, and also the secret of its longevity, and also the secret of its freshness?
I think it's driven and madness. That's
Huh?
it. Driven and madness. No.
Madness.
It has to be combined. No. Very organized and totally disorganized. That's it. But in the end, we don't care. That's, I think. We have to liberate ourselves totally. George?
It's always the question. Normally it's mixed gender couples say, what is your secret? And we say it's a secret. Sure, we always think, when being asked about London, that the important thing about London is that it's always London in the world. If you're asking about most cities, it's about that city there. And that's not true of London. We always remember the first visit by an Italian art dealer to us in Fournier Street. And he came on an aeroplane and then went into the underground, so emerged for his first time in London at Liverpool Street, where we were there to greet him. And he looked around himself. It was his first visit to London, and was obviously familiar with the cliches from the movies. And he looked around, very mystified, and said, "Where is the famous London fag?"
Obviously, you have a kind of very particular economy of your all-over effort, and I think that part of your secret, although I don't want to kind of understand your secrets necessarily or expose your secrets, is repetition. A large part, I can testify as a witness of your life, is spent in very repetitive, almost ritualistic moments that seem to be identical kind of every day.
I think more evolution than repetition, I would say. Wouldn't you, Gilbert?
But we are like monks, yes. Every day, 6 o'clock. George gets up 5:30, 5 o'clock to read dirty books. No? And we always have breakfast 6:30. No? That's it, every single day. We start working 7:30. We stopped exactly at 5 o'clock. And we start walking at 7 o'clock to our restaurant. And 8 o'clock we arrive at the restaurant, even when George takes sometimes a different route. At 10 o'clock we leave and take the bus number 67. And we are at 10:30 in Fournier Street. That's it, every single day the same. Except when we have to go out and entertain people.
Or like this morning.
One of the things, I mean, obviously, morning has to do with breakfast, but it's also got to do with newspapers and all of that. And one of the things we discussed a lot in our previous conversations about London is also sort of amazing archive you have of different newspapers. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about this.
Our favorite recent story is our favorite newspaper seller at Liverpool Street, who we've known for 40 years. And the only thing we've ever said to him is good morning, bought a newspaper, and he always says good morning, Gov. And that's it for 40 years. Until one morning recently when he said, "Here, Gov, have you heard this one?" And he said, "My sister Lily is a whore down Piccadilly. My mother is another down the Strand. My father sells his arsehole down the Elephant and Castle. We're the finest fucking family in the land." We think that's an amazing thing to hear from someone you've only ever been polite to. I said, "Would you write it down for me?" And he said, "It's only a bit of fun, you know, Gov."
Last year in Venice, I was completely amazed by the impact of Arabic script in your work, and the force that had, and the sense of real violation or really doing something completely new. Can you say something about that, or?
I think because we're surrounded by foreign language newspapers.
Huh?
There are dozens and dozens of Arabic and Hindu and Bengali script all around us, which we don't understand. But I think it's very important to use it because somebody can understand it. It doesn't matter to us that we can't understand it. But it's all a big confusion because, for instance, we did a picture called Mullah, which means a Muslim priest, in 1980. And from that day on, everyone used to say to us, "Why Mullah? What does Mullah mean? What does Mullah mean?" And then those two aeroplanes went into the buildings in New York, and nobody's asked us what a mullah is ever since. Because suddenly, in that moment, everyone knows what a mullah is. So the world is changing in that way, and we want to show that we can be
Even though
with
we,
it.
we always think, every time we see these mullahs, I always feel, I see this finger coming at you. No? I always would like to cut off that finger because they're always pointing to you, the mullahs on television. No? It's an extraordinary idea, just preaching. And that's why I never like a priest anymore, because I was brought up a Catholic and they all did the same. They all, these fingers, so all these fingers at you. I'm trying to cut off that finger one day. But I think our biggest revolution recently is because we turned ourselves into to do it all on computer. And that's extraordinary. That is the new brain for us. That we are able to transport our ideas direct into a screen.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about this? Because
It's extraordinary.
It's very interesting because you've actually...
Since when and how?
And also how, because there was a transition period where you, and then...
I think we took probably a year to change over. In 2001, Gilbert?
In 2002, we stopped working for 1 year because we had to research what we actually could do. And it was very difficult because the computers were not powerful enough. No? We were not able to make big pictures. No? But now it's unbelievable.
In fact, we started with the London East 1 pictures that you have the little catalogue. Those were the first pictures created with the computer. And a lot of people say, don't you miss the old darkroom with all the... And we say, not at all. We're very happy to be... You don't have to get up early in the morning to switch on all the water and all the horrible smell of chemicals. And we were working for 12 hours completely in the dark. You know, we're very happy to leave that behind. The only thing we miss is the rubber gloves.
And what changed in the way you work in terms of the because you also, I mean, it's kind of like very autonomous. I mean, one of the things which I think is also very, very interesting is that you don't have like lots of assistants, but you now actually do all even biggest catalogs yourself. You do all the pictures yourself. It's kind of like gives a sort of a very high degree of
freedom. It's
There's
an
great
enormous
freedom
freedom,
because
enormous freedoms.
in some way it's a total artwork from the beginning to the end. We designed the installation, we designed the catalogs, we designed the artworks. We're going to what we call the museum to put up the heights. We are total artwork. Nobody's involved except ourselves.
Even our assistant, who has the little room next to our studio, we send him away when we're designing the new pictures because we want to be totally alone at that time.
Except recently we had 2 or 3 helpers, but they were all architects. Very funny, because we prefer architects to artists. Artists are more dangerous. And so they did all the scanning for this big book that we are doing with 1,200 pages with maybe 2,000 images. And we did all the print ready in Fournier Street. It's an extraordinary job.
Incredible. Yeah.
But that was only possible because we weren't creating pictures at that time. If not, we wouldn't be able to have people like that around.
One of the questions, I've asked you that question at least 10 times before, but I thought today I should ask it again, is about your yet unrealized projects. What are the unbuilt roads of Gilbert and George?
No, we do what we want.
I think there are lots of... there are lots of projects waiting one day, but...
We're doing it.
Yes.
We are doing every day what we want. That's it. I thought that Alistair Crowley said that once.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, I think, yes.
Do what you want is
Do
the
whatever
whole of the
you
law,
want.
yeah.
But Alistair Crowley is interesting. I had a phone call the other day from a friend from Christian Kracht, who is a German novelist, and he was sort of desperately lost somewhere trying to find the house of Alistair Crowley and couldn't find it. And that reminded me that actually you had told me a lot years ago about Alistair Crowley. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about...
We were fans briefly of him, weren't we? Didn't he live in Hastings? The house is in Hastings, I thought. The wife of the person who ran the Market Cafe, Clyde at the Market Cafe, where we had lunch and breakfast for 30 years, his wife Naomi was an occultist, and she was a great follower of Crowley and of Austin Osman Spare, who did the automatic drawings. And she was able to leave her body and float to the top of the staircase and look down on herself, which is rather surprising, because she was a very big lady.
But he has an amazing head. The photograph of Alistair Crowley is extraordinary, like 666, but he's an amazing head. His shaven head, it is monstrous.
We do have a copy of his rather rare book, The Book of Lies, signed by him, 666.
What about the future? How
What
do
about
you
the
see the
future?
future?
And we always tell you, we told you many, many times, we want to be there in the future, every single day. It's nothing more exciting than that.
We are all doomed.
Many, many thanks to Gilbert and Charles.
Thank you.